Welcome to Eye on the Issues. Today we're talking homeschooling in the state of Wyoming, and we're going to talk to a mom about that, why she homeschooled, and the advantages she thinks it gives to her kids, and the challenges she's faced as she's dealt with that avenue of education, if you will. Brenna Lowry, thank you for joining us today. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, Brenna, let's begin by talking about why you chose to homeschool and how many kids.
Okay. Actually, I started homeschooling in 1998. I have 5 kids, so just this year graduated all 5. The reason there's probably a number of reasons. I don't know if I could pinpoint one. One is probably faith. I mean, if it were nowadays, I'd probably have no trouble saying I was just making an exodus from the public schools, but that wasn't quite necessarily the reason back then. I did work in the schools. I'm a speech pathologist, so I did have behind the scenes tour, I guess you'd say, of the public school world, and wasn't super impressed, but that wasn't necessarily, that was when before I was even having children. So by the time we lived in Fort Collins, by the time my son was 5, I just felt like it was my job to educate him. And so that's how the story began. We kind of did year by year at first, and then kind of caught the vision and went from there.
Okay, and so let's talk about why you believe homeschooling is a good way to go, and how you think it benefited your kids versus if they went to a public school down the street.
Okay, I first off, I'd say, I don't know that it's the best for every kid, for every parent necessarily. I think that it's a paradigm that's very viable to be the best. And part of the reason is we're our children's first teacher from the time they're born. And there's nothing really magical that happens when they turn 5 that all of a sudden it needs to be a professional endeavor. That's more of a modern take on things, so to speak. But nothing against the public schools necessarily. For me, I heard an interview by Dr. Dobson. He was interviewing, I believe, Dr. Raymond Moore, who was the author of Better Late Than Early, an educator back probably in the 70s. And they were also talking about how children lose their curiosity by 3rd grade in the public school system. This was before I was ready to educate my children at home, was even thinking about it. It seemed like a weird idea. And that to me really spoke something to my heart. I wanted my kids to be lifelong learners. I feel like God gives your children an innate curiosity to learn from the day they're born. We see that. And I know from my public experience that school wasn't all that successful in keeping that drive to learn and that curiosity for me. So that's what I would say.
So if you can tell us, when you homeschool, do you have an opportunity to kind of devise and put together a class curriculum, if you will, for your kids? Do you think that might be better tailored for them in the long run if they kind of have an idea of what they want to do with their lives?
Absolutely. I'm back when I started, there were probably a lot fewer choices. I did a lot of just putting my own things together. I think there's a couple of nuances there. It's how you as a teacher or a parent teach. And some parents prefer a very structured, textbooky kind of approach, and others maybe are able to devise a more very tailored plan to each of their kids. So yeah, it's for special needs reasons, for even one child's my son, for instance, was very interested in taxidermy and guitar making and knife making. This is my oldest son. And I actually, quite honestly, never thought he would go to college. He ended up with his PhD in chemical engineering. But when we were going through 8th grade, I was sure he probably wouldn't go to college. He had a lot of freedom to do a lot of self-directed things. I mean, of course, I was involved, but we taxidermy gophers. We took knife making classes, guitar making classes, those kinds of things. So I think there is a lot of freedom that way that you don't experience in the public schools.
Sure. So, okay. So what would you say Wyoming needs to change in order to make homeschooling more accessible to families?
I really think we have good laws here. I mean, they're not quite as free as a few other states. I'm actually also president of Homeschool Wyoming, so we meet with other organizations across the nation, and Wyoming really is pretty free as far as what we need to do. Some states don't require that homeschoolers report at all to their school districts. We are required once a year for each child between ages 6 to 16 to report our school's attendance or whatever, not attendance, but our scope and sequence and the intent to homeschool.
Uh-huh.
And
Okay.
so some states don't require that at all, but I think we have pretty good laws. They don't require us to report testing or anything like that. Now, financially, I know the big thing is ESAs, or educational spending accounts. That isn't really super beneficial for homeschoolers. What we would prefer to see is a tax credit, or perhaps 529s to be able to be used for homeschooling. So financially, that benefits it. We've also made our law a little more broad so that you can homeschool more than one family. So we still maintain parent-directed, privately funded home education, but we can include more than one family in that. So you could choose another family per se to educate your children.
So in respect to state, county, and other possible obstacles, you really don't see many in Wyoming. You feel like you have a lot of freedom.
I do. I feel like we're pretty good. Yeah,
Okay, that's good.
it could always drop down. I say like in the letter of intent, but really, I'm pretty satisfied with what we have.
Gotcha. And you said your oldest one even got a PhD. So
my oldest is 30. He just finished his PhD in chemical engineering. Correct.
That's incredible. That is a homeschooling success story if I've ever heard one. What would you say to people that are watching this right now and saying to themselves, well, I'm kind of thinking about homeschooling, but I'm not really sure? Could you kind of paint a picture of them of pros and cons?
I think some of the biggest hindrance is in mindset that you somehow at age 5 it needs to go to a professional to educate your children. You know your children best, and I think to me the long view was to have the relationship with my children. I felt like if they're gone 6-8 hours a day and then I need to somehow establish a relationship in those off hours, it didn't seem possible. The other success story, I do agree with you. My kids have all attained, I guess, academic success, but that I also have both my husband and I have a very good relationship with our children. And I think that's from spending the currency of my days with them, investing in the things that they're interested in, and fostering the curiosity. So not all parents necessarily want that. Maybe they want their children to go away to school. I've heard that before, but I think the time that you invest is well worth it. And so I think it's really something that every parent can do if they put their mind to it and have the will to do it, for sure.
And where you suggest people go to get resources and find out more about homeschooling?
Well, they can visit our website. We're updating even more, but nowadays there are so many curriculum choices for homeschooling. It's booming since in the last 10 years, and especially since COVID, there's been so many more people choosing homeschooling or maybe running away from the public schools so as an option. So there are lots and lots of different ideas. There are different websites you can take tests to see how you teach and see how your children learn. So helps you tailor the education.
And what is your website, number one, and number two, where would they find those tests you're talking about?
Well, I think we list those as resources on our website. I've just been going back through and kind of updating. I took over last year, kind of updating to a more Gen Z or Gen X type of resources with podcasts and things like that. Our website is homeschoolwy.org.
Homeschoolwy.org. Gotcha. And so I know, of course, your oldest has got the PhD. Can you give me any other examples of any of the other kids that homeschooling you were able to tailor their learning path to what they really wanted?
Sure, absolutely. My second son his story is a little different. He was involved in a really bad accident at 18, but up until then, we did speech and debate. We live in Cheyenne. We drove to Denver for speech and debate. He was very, very interested in that, and also did a thing called Team Pact. That we did a lot of legislative work, and he was able to staff in different states for Team Pact. He was headed toward law and economics. He ended up, because of his accident, he suffered a brain injury, but he's a paralegal now. And I consider that a success story. My daughter was able to develop her music so well that she taught music, got a music scholarship, but put herself through nursing school. So again, she now works as a nurse and also teaches music. So, and I know I have friends whose kids are lawyers. There's all kinds of, if you just consider academics, I don't think there's any limit as far as homeschooling goes.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic.
Colleges
so if you
colleges were actually seeking after homeschoolers. It used to be a thing where that was kind of a fear for a lot of parents. They put their kids back in high school, but nowadays colleges are seeing the success of homeschoolers just because there are a lot of them, and I'm not saying everyone, just like every public schooler, but are taught to teach, they learn how to learn. And so because of that self-motivation, colleges are often very accepting of homeschoolers and seeking them out.
Great to hear. So if you had to finish this sentence, I think homeschooling is great because, how would you do that?
Oh, I think homeschooling is great because of the amount of time you get to spend with your children and the chance to speak into their lives in their particular giftings and tailor their education that way. It also fosters the relationships between siblings, quite honestly. So.
Right, because they spend lots of time together, obviously.
Yeah.
A lot. Yeah. So is there anything I'm not asking you about that you think people should know that are contemplating homeschooling?
I know that a lot of parents, I think the biggest thing that I would tell, I think one of the questions you did maybe left out was I guess you kind of phrased it in what I would tell someone else about schooling. The other thing I would say is because public school was done to you, you don't take public school home and try to do that at home. That's not even the point. Homeschooling is a whole different ball of wax. And as soon as you can free yourself from the paradigm of public education, then homeschooling becomes the sky's the limit, basically, on that. So.
Good to hear. Good to hear. So if you had to tell me what you like most about living in Wyoming, what would it be?
Most about Wyoming, I love the mountains, absolutely. And I love the way of life here. We were just back in North Carolina for a conference, and probably 50% of the people we met said, "Oh, Wyoming's my favorite state." So
Brenna, thank you so much for your insight. People are going to appreciate watching and listening to this, especially people that are considering homeschooling their kids. So for anybody that is watching this and want to learn more about the Wyoming Liberty Group, you can go to yliberty.org and sign up for a newsletter. Thanks again, Brenna.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
Take care.